Allow me to recognize the presence of the Deputy Principal, Professor Julius Tikoma, who is here. And also I would like to send apologies on behalf of the Principal, Professor Josephine Ikire, who has two commitments at this time. She's attending to another function and will join us shortly to give her remarks when she finishes with that. So we'll change the program a little bit and have her remarks later. Since she's the mentor to Dr. Amon Mwiine, we'd want to listen to her and hear how this research has gone on and the new insights into the debate about masculinities and its place in the scholarship of gender. Allow me to recognize the presence of Professor Grace Bantebia, one of our senior colleagues in the School of Women and Gender Studies, is with us here, and many scholars who are present physically. I acknowledge your presence and warmly welcome you to the discussion. I recognize the presence of our students who are available online. Our panelists are all available online. Mr. Hassan Sekajala is available online. He's physically here. Okay, you're both here and online, so I thought you were not available. You're available physically. You're most welcome. At least we have one panelist available online. And then we have the lead discussant, Professor Joy Kwesiga, is available online as well. Professor will introduce you at that appropriate time when you're going to be making your remarks, but we're very excited to have you back here in Makerere. It's always a great pleasure to have you here with us at home in the School of Women and Gender Studies. Dr. Madanda Ramazan is available online. I can see you there. We'll also introduce you at that time. Without wasting much time, I would like to invite Dr. Amon Mwiine to give us his presentation.
Okay, I'm trying to share the screen. So as the technical team works on this.
As he prepares to share the screen, allow me also to recognize the presence of one of our international scholars, Dr. who is a scholar from University of Lagos, and he's a visiting scholar on the Identities Arua Center of Excellence. You're most welcome to this discussion, and we are very excited to have you here. Choose is on the move and is having a lot of programs, a lot of collaborations. So we are always very excited to have new scholars here. The principal has just joined us from the other meeting, and we were about to just invite your mentee to make his presentation. But I think it would be in order for us to have you first give your remarks, and then he can make the presentation. Sorry to not give you a breathing space, but we know you're always welcome and always ready to give that remark. So let me swing back to the principal and let her give her remarks.
I'm just hoping that this is 2 meters. Good morning, everyone, participants, physical and online. Our deputy principal, our early career researcher, the dean, School of Women and Gender Studies, Professor Sarah Sali. All, I'm not seeing the people online I would have wanted to see. You could pull down the and oh dear. Yeah, all of you are present. Today is not my day, it is for Dr. Amon Mwiine, so I'm going to be very, very brief. And to say, first of all, in my capacity as principal of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, we are very gratified that the people who have participated in college-based projects, especially on the early career scholars, have been able to execute the projects, the research endeavors, and have, are finalizing and have made impact on scholarship. Because our argument was that when people complete their PhDs, they sort of remain in abeyance as if they are on departure lounge, they are not arriving, they are not leaving. And this gives us a boost that we are creating or contributing to the creation of a generation of African scholars. In the proposal, we said quotable. So if we write things and they are not quoted, the Dean, School of Women and Gender Studies, that's something to note. I would like to thank the Dean for promoting scholarship at the school level. And I would also like to thank the project team. Professor Chikoma is here with us. Dr. Edgar Navutanyi, Dr. Levis Mugumya. All these have supported the scholars in all possible ways, and to sort of implement and their scholarship endeavors in a timely manner. Now, on this project, I first encountered the issue of masculinity and the need to actually think critically when we were working with Dr. Madanda on post-war Northern Uganda. Our issue when we went there was to look at how women were faring in the post-war as they were returning from the IDPs, how they are suffering to put food on the table. And we were forced to deal with the question of how men have nothing to do with themselves. When I say nothing to do with themselves, nothing to do with the power that they perceive they hold, because it had been undercut by the war. Nothing to do with the time that they have and the energy that they have, which sometimes they would channel to violence. Nothing to do in the dispensation of post-war, which was focused on projects which emphasized the livelihood and day-to-day, which then fell on women. Nothing to do, majority of them, with restocking, because most of them were not in that higher rank of being having reparations or having compensation. So you have a broad majority of men socially displaced. And we had to really sort of change our perspective on how post-war is supposed to actually be positioned. The next that I was forced is to deal with is when with Dr. Amon Mwiine, we did a study on Domestic Violence Act, and we encountered for the very first time, the prominent role of what you call male champions. And actually, from that, Amon derived his sort of PhD thesis and argument. And as we were celebrating the male promoters of the Domestic Violence Act, the motion was moved by a male legislator. The UOPA, Uganda Women's Parliamentary Association, had done a lot to bring the male voice and to be able to, because Parliament tends to listen to male legislators. So let's have a man to move. And as we were already celebrating that, one of the activist women told us, as you celebrate that male champion, you know he was the biggest resistor of the marriage and divorce. The same person. And we started thinking, okay, so what are we actually dealing with as we look at male champions? So the journey has been long, actually. These questions around 2014, I think. Is that right? Yes, until now, he got an opportunity to deepen his thoughts on critical masculinities, and hence this project. And we've had debates around, what is it that you're actually arguing? Because sometimes you can stand and walk on a slippery slope without knowing. So as scholars, there is need to actually constantly question and constantly problematize what is it that we are dealing with. So as college, we are really gratified and would like to see more publications coming up. I would like to thank Dr. Amon Mwiine for the multiple spaces that he has taken this work and the kinds of arguments that have enriched this work. He has spread the wings deep and wide, and that is exactly what we are looking at in terms of supporting scholarship of early career. And without really attempting to take over the stage of Amon on critical masculinities, let me allow him to talk about how feminist activism has encountered masculinities in this contemporary era. Thank you very much, moderator.
Thank you very much.
Is Professor Joy online?
Yes, she's available
okay,
online.
Professor Joy Kwesiga, you're very welcome to this encounter. We call you academic singer. So there are all these generations of mentoring that are here. We have Professor Grace Vantevia in the room, and we have all these generations, and would like to thank you very much for this connecting the dots.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Indeed, it's always heartwarming to be mentored by people who are very concerned with the scholarship and the growth of the mentees. And you've been one example of a leader who does not lead alone, leads by pulling others and bringing them closer. And we're very happy to have you at the center of all this. Without wasting much time, let me invite Dr. Amon Mwiine to open up with the presentation. You're welcome.
Thank you so much, moderator. Thank you, my mentor, Professor Josephine Ashire, the Dean School of Women and Gender Studies, the Deputy Principal College of Humanities and Social Sciences, and our audiences, physical and virtual. We really thank you for being part of this conversation. Feminist activism encounters masculinities. We are looking at the lessons that I have drawn from this research journey. of looking at feminist activism and looking at critical masculinities. Thank you to Maureen Milaneza, who was part of this research team as the research assistant. I want to start from an earlier history, what I called returning to Namirembe Cathedral. Namirembe Cathedral is one of the original 7 hills of, sits on one of the 7 hills of Kampala. The hills have since expanded, but it is a seat of the Anglican religion since 1891. It has also hosted the official seat of the Archbishop of the Church of Uganda. I call it returning to Namirembe Cathedral because it has a very interesting history of activism around women's rights as early as 1891. It has also, around that time, it received several petitions by women who identified collectively under the voluntary Christian-centered women clubs during colonialism, petitions against things that compromised their welfare at the household level and also in the public. And recently in 2020, it became also another interesting space for reframing critical debates that we would like to look at. And I would like to read something short from my research report. I note that the question of men and masculinities in feminist conversation is steadily gaining currency in scholarship, in activism for gender equality, and also in everyday life. I noted that very recently in 2020, narratives on the negation of the boy child in favor of the girl child and the presence and the absence of fathers in homes and in places of worship was among the top concerns raised by the Right Reverend Dr. Stephen Kazimba Mugalu, the Anglican Archbishop of the Church of Uganda, right there at Namirembe. This was during his inaugural sermon, shortly after being consecrated. And in an emphatic question to the seemingly male-dominated audience, the Archbishop asked, "Where are the men?" In addition to this question, the newly consecrated Archbishop noted that while Uganda was appropriately has supported girl child education, the boy child has been neglected. The narrative on the apparent neglect of the boy child, especially in gender equality activism, is not new in Uganda. And indeed, each one of you could point out a scenario where you were able to hear this or being part of this conversation. However, it is the context in which this particular conversation emerges by the most powerful religious leaders during his inaugural sermon at Namirembe Cathedral, a place which we have already had its history with women's welfare campaigns, before a very huge audience of diverse nationalities, gender, class, race, ethnicities, and other identities that makes this issue or narrative political and of interest. And, as I have lightly pointed out, this Namirembe Hill is documented in the history of feminist activism as a symbolic seat of religious and colonial power. And as a symbolic seat, we are reminded that this seat received several protests by women activists at the time. And we also see 7 decades later, the same place becomes the platform upon which gender equity agendas are raised, framed and reframed, amplified, except that this time round, the the position which was receiving the petitions and protests is the position that is airing out discontent. So in some ways, I look back into history since independence and look at how feminist activism in Africa and Uganda has had different waves and critical agendas. And I look at this particular agenda, which I have characterized as the turn to male involvement in gender equality. I will define that later as we move on. I note that while the turn to male involvement, this increased focus on how do we work with men to promote gender equality, while it bears the potential of inclusion and transformation of gender relations, I note that this turn has not been without effect. So in a way, I thought to analyze particular junctures within feminist activism and look at how this activism has interfaced with, engaged with the question of men and masculinity. I look at how particular agendas characterize, constitute, and represent men and women as social categories. I look at how these agendas have defined the concept of gender and deployed it. I then look at how these encounters create particular narratives and the implications that these narratives have for feminist theory and for gender transformation. I particularly took a historical approach, one because that is what the scholarship really wanted us to be embedded into, looking back into history, visiting women's organizations that have engaged into feminist activism, particularly Action for Development and Uganda Women's Network, going into their libraries, looking at the documents they had, the research reports, but also visiting historical places that have shaped activism for women's welfare, for women's rights, particularly Milembe Cathedral, encountering prominent figures, women's rights, one of them being Mary. Came in and the country was locked. I then shifted to what I called media mapping of conversation on women's rights and men involvement, because the lockdown, compelled us to stay home. And I thought scanning through the media and monitoring conversations on gender equality could afford us certain forms of conversations on men and women and their participation in gender equality. I particularly look at the word encounter, feminism encountering masculinities, because of the inspiration I get from feminist scholarship, working with Grace Msida, particularly her work on narratives. She talks about one key concept of contact zones, which she terms as the social spaces where desperate cultures meet, clash with each other, and grapple with each other, often in highly asymmetric relations of power. She also looks at, interrogating discourses that are often competing. And to me, the idea of feminist activism and masculinities or male involvement has always, behaved like that kind of encounter, grappling with each other, filled with contestation. I also work with Obioma Naimeka, who is an African feminist, talking about politics of negotiation and theorizing around what she terms nego-feminism, particularly looking at how African women have engaged with negotiating deep-rooted patriarchal practices that compromise equality. And in that discussion, she really raises an interesting concept of border crossing, which is about transcending binary oppositions to be able to learn about, but also from the other. And then lastly, I work with Kopano Ratere and his theorization around critical masculinities. He deeply writes about how to research men and masculinities in critical ways. And so this kind of scholarship enabled me to look at the tensions and polarities that often play out when feminism encounters notions of masculinities. And so there are critical junctures which I picked up, which I would like to only make a reference to be able to cross over to the real encounter with men and masculinities, which becomes prominent in 2000. We've had writers, critical writers within the women's movement in Uganda and beyond, writing about the history of women's activism as far as 1920s. Tripp, Ntiro, Kwesiga, Tamare, Achille, they have all written about the history. And one of the interesting things they point out is the kind of colonial discourse that informed the early activism, framing of activism, where women associational activities presented in form of voluntary Christian-centered and community-oriented women clubs, the Mothers Union, Girl Guides associations, and how these had an agenda of sanitizing, modernizing, and also civilizing colonies. Because we can see that these women clubs operated under the motto that applauded women as housewives, as good mothers who existed to build good homes. And in some ways, you can see colonial discourses cropping in, defining women as private actors within the domestic sphere, and men being put on the other side as public actors, as close to the state, as representing a universal position of privilege and power, regardless of the differences in ethnicities, in classes, in race, and other positions of authority. So you look at women activists with an effect of sort of privatizing women's lives and responding to women's practical needs, and a total silence on reflection on the position of men, because there's an assumption that these are private actors, public actors, and already close to the state, occupying a universal position of privilege. So I want to leave that historical journey. These junctures have been well written about by African feminists, by women in the women's movement. I really want to pick up on critical junctures that shaped the definition of gender, but also the place of men in gender equality. And one of them is the 1980s process of state and its efforts to institutionalize gender equality agenda. And in reviewing and engaging with this history, I met that prominent symbol, the symbol of balancing the scale. This in late 1980s became like a dominant guiding frame to understand and challenge gender inequalities. And it was very popular within the Ministry of Gender. By then it was called Ministry of Women in Development, through its training manuals. And what this time did, or why I find this very significant in the history of gender equality, is that it became the dominant through which inequality was understood. And one of the respondents I talked to, who worked in the ministry around that time, noted that in this balancing the scales training manual, the message was that no, when the scale is tilted on one side, you have to put more weight on the other side, which is light, so that reading it in 1980s and thinking about people who have written about strategic engagement with the question of women as an issue of identity, appreciating, for instance, the likes of Judith Butler, the likes of Spivak, Gayatri, and looking at how at times there is need to name an identity category for purposes of political recognition, for purposes of attention, because of the pervasive levels of inequality. And I think this symbol does that in 1980s. But reading it from the current moment, 2021, with certain levels of transformation in gender equality, it becomes a problematic symbol. Because then it informed programming around specific interventions focusing on women, and a certain level of silence on experiences of men. Because in that same conversation we had, I was told that programming started to emphasize strategies that focused on girls to bring equality, and experiences of boys, particularly in the fishing communities, in the pastoral communities, were observed, but were not seen as significant and worth attention. And so they were not prioritized at that moment because of a symbol that polarizes men and women. And so you had that kind of prism trickling into much of the feminist activism that we had in early 1990s. One of the prominent documents that gives you that history is the Arise magazine of Action for Development, particularly around the campaign on women and environment. I picked just a small section in that conversation where in this campaign, this article reported that as a result of political, social, and economic changes, Ugandan women, like their counterparts in the rest of Africa, have invaded and penetrated what used to be purely male-dominated activities, such as rock excavation, in order to sustain themselves and their families. And in this conversation, the activists protested the numerous health hazards that women worked under in the excavation industry. And they pointed some as the risk of losing sight because of the stone fragments, the body cuts, the common incidences of malaria during rainy season because of the mosquitoes. And they demanded that government needed to pay attention to the lives of women in this aspect. And then you do not find any conversation around the possibility of male vulnerability in these similar health hazards, especially given that, as the story told us, that the men have historically engaged in this quarrying industry. So you start to see silences around possible prospects of male vulnerability, or the silences around the place of men in that where women have found themselves. I also encountered another example from the interviews, which I shared in the report. I also want to read out. One of the individuals I talked to, noting that, when I was at Makerere University, I wrote a proposal, and I wanted to research especially on men working in women's organizations or spaces dominated by women. However, that proposal was never funded. And then he laughs. There was a prolonged laughter there. Maybe now it can be funded. He told me. He told me that it was seen as crazy at the time, diversionary, and uncalled for. And I look at these as products of the prism that polarizes men and women and renders the other invisible, and constrains how much you can know about the other. And so you had more phases of activism around violence against women, which in some ways, as I say, required that specific focus on women because of the massive levels of discrimination that women went through. But as a result, they were producing gender in problematic ways, in restrictive ways, as about women, and nurturing other binaries. For instance, perpetrators versus victims, the us and them, and all that. And as you move on, then you encounter questions on, by the way, what is the role of men in all this that we are doing? And that question becomes very prominent around mid-1990s. In 95, during the Beijing conference, where certain group of men traveled to the conference and encountered very complex questions. So you had at one point certain actors thinking that we need to rethink our activism. We need to look at whether we can empower women without looking at the lives of men with whom they live. So you had questions within the movement asking, where are the men in the movement? And then you had others asking, why are you here? And this question comes from the Beijing platform, men who went to the conference being asked, why are you here? Why have you come? This is a women's conference. And slowly, these questions, contradictory questions, pointed to the need to rethink the position of men. Interesting photos in the archives of Action for Development, but also Uganda Women's Network. Activism centrally led by women about violence against women. And I found it interesting in the sense that, looking at the figures, the visual part of it, there's one man at the margin who seems not to be understanding what is going on. And this seemed to, visualize the kind of struggles that were happening at that time. And then talking to women who were in the movement, in leadership positions at the front line, one of them noted that indeed at that time, the question of men in the movement became real. So this participant noted, I think the idea of bringing men came in out of enthusiasm. Men are usually pointing out, whether casually or not, and they say, but you cannot do this work alone. You cannot change society without inclusion of men. So it is not just the comments, but eventually it became a reality, and mainly arising from gender awareness training. And women's rights organizations in their training started to encounter this question. And she noted that we realized that you cannot actually just motivate or empower women alone without their spouses or their leaders in the community. You needed to bring them on board. If there were no men in the training, people would still question how you are doing this. So this became a real repetitive question in the movement. And we saw a lot of response as we move into 2000, what I called the millennial call to involve men in gender equality. Widespread global calls from World Bank, from IMF, on men involvement. And this involvement was the first, instances looked at movement of men in the empowerment of women and girls. Around 2014, we saw UN Women launching the popular campaign, He for She campaign, by Emma Watson, one of its ambassadors. And this is also looking at how do we draw on men to empower women and girls. We saw a number of women's organizations being formed, responding to these calls. We saw men engaged networks widening. We saw selected women's rights organizations working with men as allies, as change agents. We saw institutions forming what they called male action groups, widening Okay. Okay, I can go on? Okay, I can go on? I can go on? Okay, okay. So we've seen growth in that direction. And this is the growth that I characterize as the turn to male involvement. And I want to note that this turn to men involvement has indeed created a certain sense of optimism for gender equality, a period of strategic maneuver, as Tamari calls it, or drawing strategies that are bending towards negotiating patriarchy or leveraging female voice, as Muse indicates. We've seen gender equity reforms and transformational practices. For instance, we've talked about Domestic Violence Act, prohibition of female genital mutilation. We have also seen women parliamentarians working with male MPs as allies in the promotion of sexual offences bill. We have also seen very many models developed with male involvement strategy within the civil society. We have seen allyship, women's rights organizations critically looking at building allies with men to promote gender equality. We have seen a possibility to talk about men as gendered subjects and about men's experiences in gender conversation. This is largely in academia, in research, and I think it has also reached within the activism. Within the School of Women and Gender Studies itself, we have a course on critical masculinities. So we have seen a shift towards a certain stage where we are moving beyond the polarities of women against men. But we have also seen conversations on involving men as no longer the question whether we should involve them or not, but rather a question of how do we need to involve them? We have seen a growing scholarship on research. We have seen growth around curriculum on masculinities. We have seen growth of conversations on how to work with men to prevent gender-based violence, to prevent sexual harassment. Here at Makerere University, we have what we have seen as the male hub within the broader project of kicking sexual harassment outside institutions of higher learning. And so there has been greater learnings from this turn of men involvement. We have come to the realization that introducing particular problematic notions that we intend to challenge. So this is the conversation I wanted us to be part of. How much space, sort of a question, how much space have we given to interrogating these quickly assembled, catchy, trendy statements, especially their likely potential to come up with a troubled past of sexism, of patriarchal institutional cultures. I just shared a picture which I made in my research, which talks about working with male involvement to promote antenatal care, which has a statement there, attend antenatal clinic with the help of male involvement. But you can see the graphic illustration of the picture. You have women here expecting mothers, and then you have men on the other side, even when we're talking about male involvement. So why are we involving men into this healthcare aspect? Have they known the kind of conversation, the requirements, the needs, the necessities that this medical person is taking the women through? Or we have allowed them to go in their corner and catch up on whatever, male stories. And so these are the kind of framings that I wanted us to be critical of, so that none of the male engagement strategy reproduces the binary that we are trying to overcome. Okay. And then the other issue that I noted as an issue of concern was the idea of working with men to speak to women's issues, particularly in parliament. And I was thinking, this idea of one speaking on behalf of another, because when the other speaks, they are not considered as significant. Isn't that problematic? If we say we want male champions to speak to women's issues, yes, this has been, rationalized on the basis that when men speak, they wield influence on the floor of parliament, and they gather support of both men and women, and then we are able to have reforms passed on the floor of parliament, like Domestic Violence Act and etc. And for those who have rationalized and justified this, they have argued that this is a short-term strategic maneuver of patriarchy. So I was asking that when we strategize for male involvement, using those short-term strategic maneuver pragmatic approaches, when these become long-term, what risk do we run into? Do we run into legitimizing male voice in public discourse and marginalizing women's voice? Or when we strategize for male involvement, which men are we looking at? Because we have learned that masculinities take different forms and shapes. Which men are we looking at? Why are we looking at them? How do we engage them? And what form of change do we want to see amongst these men? Are these kinds of questions that we ask of the strategies of male involvement? When you have a short-term strategy that has stayed for long and has become a long-term strategy, what do we stand to lose? Because one of the women activists and legislator noted that when you're working with men as promoters of gender equality in parliament, you beg, you plead, you loll down. And she noted that it is very frustrating. It is as if you're reproducing husband-wife domestic relations in parliament, that you reach a level where you lose the honorable title. And so we're looking at possibility that if we lack the critical eye on the male engagement, we might quickly slide into backlash, loading back the feminist gains of this campaign that we have seen for ages. So for some people, there's a very thin line between male engagement strategies and reproduction of male hegemony. So how do we critically guard against the possibility of reproducing the same challenges that we want to address? And then this, graphic really brings the conversation home. In one side was the campaign on, men at work for gender equality. And this is the statement that appeared on the national TV NBS during the launch, using men to address gender-based violence. And I can assure you this also trickled in the conversation. And then I raised it. I said, could this be something that was written wrongly by somebody in the studio, or is this part of the principle of engagement? And then they said, well, this is part of the principle. We want to use men in positions of power to achieve something. And it looked like an instrumental approach in which men are seen as conduits. Yet there are at times the individuals that we hope they can change. But if we're not focusing on them and enabling them to be part of this conversation, how are we going to have their behavior and practice and etc. changing? And then when this landed on Twitter, there was another conversation from women activists. And one asked, I need help. I am really struggling with these campaigns that have become huge programs. And then they are named there, as you see on the Twitter, public. And then the activist ends saying, patriarchy has a way of transforming itself, and you are all supporting, watch the outcome soon. And then I followed that tweet and I said, okay, this might be problematic, but does standing by and watching help? Is this not the time to engage and raise our concerns and see how we can rethink the place of men in this conversation? What is our willingness as feminist activists to transcend the us and them, the balancing scale syndrome, to interrogate, these subjects deeply, to imagine the possibility that men have anything to benefit from gender equality? That when we are focusing on them, it's not because we want them to benefit women and girls. And for me, these binaries and reluctance to stand and watch and wait for the outcome, it looked like what Bell Hooks, one of the Black American feminists, has called feminist reluctance to know and interrogate masculinities. Because when we stand aside, there's a possibility that we can end up legitimizing what we think is not working right. So I had an opportunity to share these concerns in a number of conversations that have come through during this fellowship. Through the book chapter, through the journal article, through a global interview with Euronews in France, through blogs around COVID-19 and how it was reconfiguring experiences of men, to looking at the newness that was emerging from conversations on gender-based violence, to looking at this collaborative study with Center for Health and Human Rights, CEHAD, on men, masculinities, and sexual reproductive health, to articulating lockdown masculinities, which is still in place, to a national conversation on NBS TV breakfast meeting, thinking about, reflecting on the role of men in gender equality, to international conferences and also the national conferences. And having come through this conversation, there are two things that I noted. One, that I think it is time that we cross borders. Then I return to, Obioma Naimeka on crossing borders, going beyond these binaries of I am looking at women, I have nothing to do with men. I am looking at men, I have nothing to do with the women's movement. Crossing these historically polarized conversations to be able to examine often unexamined experiences of men as gender subjectivities, transcending, polarities of perpetrator, victimhood, academic, civil society. There's a way how the academia is often dismissed as abstract and theorizing, and yet this creates a converging space for the academia and the civil society to reflect on how to move forward on social transformation, to transcend men and women, right and wrong, to transcend femininities versus masculinities. So this concept of border crossing entails the willingness to learn about the other. And it opens space to know, and to know the alternatives, to know the divergences, to know, diverse opportunities that we have to transform gender equality. And the second aspect is that as we look into the number of men engaged strategies that are coming up, I think we need to interrogate this turn to men involvement to counter any possible reproduction of new forms of what you can call new forms of patriarchy. Sometimes it comes in form of gender equality, and because it looks like gender equality, it is too difficult to challenge. So we need to keep a critical eye to be able to tame any new forms of patriarchies, or what one of our scholars, Msimenta, called redefined subordinations. And one key question I wanted to end with, which has been on Twitter, is to look at what it is that men stand to gain from gender equality, so that when we're engaging them, it's not because they're a conduit to, impacting women and girls, but rather that this needs to be part of, first of all, we need to transform the lives of people, because first and foremost, they have everything to gain from this, to question their power, to question their presumed power. That way we'll create a conducive environment for gender equal transformation. I want to stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Amon. It's unfortunate that we went offline when you were giving the conclusion, but most of the presentation has been very, very engaging and exciting, and inviting us actually to rethink our discussion on gender and equality, especially how we involve men. The idea of representation. We had been talking about representation as feminists and talking about representation across the diaspora, representation across race. How can we talk about empowerment and equality when we have different forms of inequalities? And the conversation goes deeper now. How would we talk about representation, speaking on behalf of another, when men speak on behalf of women? It just reminds me of what happened recently when a male grandchild went to the market to appreciate his grandmother for educating him, and he knelt down and thanked the grandmother. And those are the kinds of discussions that we should be engaging in. Do we need to rethink the polarization, the thinking about patriarchy as one big whole, masculinity as this one big monster? Or do we have positive masculinities that we need to think about? Do we have to think about the vulnerabilities? But the conversation is just beginning, and I want to introduce to you the next speaker, Professor Joy Kwesiga, who is going to be the lead discussant. Before I introduce her, I want to recognize the presence of Dr. Amon A, who is one of the panelists. I hadn't recognized you when I recognized the others. You're most welcome. I hope the internet is really going to behave and allow us to listen to these discussions, because so far we have had to be very patient about it going on and off. So Professor Joy Kwesiga, you have 20 minutes within which to make your presentation. And I know you have a very, very rich background in gender. Let me try to introduce you in as, I don't know how good it will be. Professor Joy Kwesiga is the Vice Chancellor at Kabale University, a feminist activist, a founding member of Action for Development, and she combines both the academia and activism. This discussion, we could not have chosen a better person to give us insights into this topic. She was one of the first scholars behind the School of Women and Gender Studies. She was the head of department in the School of Women and Gender Studies, at that time known as the Department of Women and Gender Studies, went on to become the Dean Faculty of Social Sciences. And then she was the founding head of Gender Mainstreaming Division, the Academic Registrar's Department of Makerere University. And she has done a lot of scholarship and writing in gender studies, including the book, The Women's Movement in Uganda. She has been involved in education, both at administrative level and in scholarship and writing about the women's movement in Uganda. She has a wealth of information that she will be sharing with us, seeing from the moment when she and a group of other women started the School of Women and Gender Studies onto the activism platform of Action for Development. And now we are engaging men and saying we need to discuss the issue of masculinities. Professor Joy Kwesiga, you're most welcome to this conversation.
Okay, thank you very much. That is enough of me on the video. Thank you very much, moderator. I want to greet each of you, all of you present online and in Makerere from Kabale University, where I am right now. It's good to be back with the colleagues in the gender studies and in the field itself. So I'm very happy to be part of this program. I've just arrived almost from Benin, Cotonou, where there was reform. Those of you who know about reform. And the journey was very long because we were offloaded in Addis. So if you add the journey to Kabale, that's a bit far. So I couldn't do the PowerPoint that I had intended to do, but still I'll make my remarks. I hope it will be easy for you to follow, for me to be able to say what I want to say. So the first point is to congratulate the principal and all you members of CHOOS for putting across this I think you called it early career research program. I think it's very useful. It helps so that the early researchers can feel more easily than has been in the past to make a breakthrough. I'd like to congratulate Mwiine on this very long journey, because I think he has actually tried his best to move. Actually, it is fast. And I agreed to be part of this program, although now I have, I don't know, I see unstable internet. Am I being heard? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, so Mwiine, when he completed his gender studies, he visited Minikaba University and said since he could help start either gender studies or gender office, help in some way to promote gender equality in the university. And actually allowed him to come in because this was necessary. But the university was struggling in its early days as a private university. And Mwiine got a chance to go back to Makerere as a teaching assistant, and he made a good decision because it has helped him to grow very fast. And I'm glad that he has reached this stage. So it is for this reason that I thought I should not fail him when he called me to be able to make a few remarks about his research and his presentation. When I complete this on moderator, I'll go to join a Senate members who have an emergency, but I asked that I be excused. I delegated and I'll be going back later. Won't be in the full process, the full discussion. So coming back to this topic, I think this is a very important topic in terms of gender studies, because this dilemma has always been on. All of you know that the feminism that you've tagged partly because of this issue, as feminists were being labeled as those who want to work with men or those who hate men. I won't go in those details. I think from the very beginning, there's been this gap of fear, especially in Eastern studies. And I recall somewhere about 98, I represented the Department of Gender Studies in Scotland. And when I mentioned that we had male students, and I also mentioned about the NGO work we had in Oxford, where we had male members and trainers, they were all surprised. How do you manage that? How can you work together? Because of the background and the kind of exclusion that had taken place as people started thinking about gender studies or writing about gender studies as scholars. So this is still an unsettled matter because, as Amon says, there's these questions of if and why and how are still taking place. And yet our aim is to reach gender equality. And I think the Archbishop of the Church of Uganda is still going ahead, because I think on Monday he talked about this in the Monitor once again. So that is something we need to look through, because if the leaders are thinking of those issues, we need to see how we get involved. And I want to just mention something that you all know, because this is a leader, as Amon said. But even up to now, when you are considering issues on education and whether it is at State House or other places, there is always this mention, not only by the head of state, but even other people. How can you spend 3 years studying women's studies? Who doesn't know about women and men? So we still have a long way to go, and the involvement of men becomes even more important, because those who are giving those statements usually actually men. So we need to continue the debate and see how we can bring them in and how they can talk on behalf of women, as it were. But gender studies, as you know, I think I don't need to go in details. It helps us to understand and be able to reach get the equity that we are all looking about. I want to refer to the 1990s, 1980s, when the development workers actually brought in men more than, I think that was the start of bringing in men to be able to work with women so as to promote gender equality and gender equity. And those of you who are trainers, you will know that if you use areas like the training of farmers, you know, these crop calendars that you use in order to be able to I'm very sorry. I left my phone on because of the meeting I have, but let me switch it off.
It's okay.
Sorry about that. I'll deal with the person. I'll send a message. So I'm referring to the phase where developers so need to work it was the only way they could easily make both men and women realize that there was really a gap. And maybe I couldn't use the word utilizing, but that's what it was, utilizing the presence of men in those groups. It was able to help them make a breakthrough and be able to have some agreement about especially the division of labor. So men at that time became part of the whole development issue and how we could improve our working together. And when we come into Uganda, this is just my brief as an individual, as I see things, and somebody who was involved. There is the issue of identity, which I think stops, brings about, it's an obstacle because men think about themselves. If I see myself being very, should we call it pro-women or promoting gender equality, I may be not taken very well, not regarded very well amongst fellow men. The issue of identity. And I remember as a very young girl, I was reflecting on this issue as I record my life. I noted through just hearing what men were doing in rural areas, and I would see people of my father's age, my uncles, teasing one of the men who was very active in helping his wife, especially when she was expecting. He would do almost all the work, domestic work, and they would say, what's wrong with this man? When there is a discussion, he's busy mingling millet for his wife, and they would laugh at him. So in that situation, many shy from doing the kind of work, talking on behalf of, talking gender, and this is on both sides, and fear of change is not just in gender studies or between men and women. We know of it in class, for example, and race. You can recall, for instance, this book or the play that Ngugi wa Thiong'o wrote about his community, the Kikuyu community, when it was about class actually. I think I don't remember the title, Ngahikandenda in Kikuyu, talking about the farmers, a rich man's son who was made pregnant, a worker's daughter. And there's that debate about it, because they think that they shouldn't be able, when they talk about marriage, they say, no, 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 there's that gap. You need, I think many of you have read that book, you will know that there's that debate and division about class. So it is with also with gender and men working together with women. I want to give an example of action for development where I was very much involved. In the late 80s, early 90s, Oxford was at its height and was influencing the national debates. And some of the men wanted to join. So as Oxford women members, we said, no, we debated and said, they're going to come and take over. Let's first establish ourselves. And our decision was that we make them associate members, because we said, though at least they will not be full members, but if they are key, we shall be judging whether they are really genuine, eventually they can become full members. So that was the of power, or the realm of, and I think that called the male hegemony, this kind of new approach to working with the men. So that fear is there, I think, somewhere. But, I think we are finding out whether and men can be able to talk to gender and gender is. So when you look at the groupings, I look at, when I reflect on this issue, I see different groups of male promoters of gender equality, or who are able to talk women or for women. And the first group, I think there are some academicians who do research on these issues and able to get awards and that kind of thing. You can also compare them with employees, say in the NGOs, these women's organizations, who way and be able to move. But now, do they have the part of the feel for that change they are working for under these organizations, or the research they are doing? So that would be one group who are performing a job very well. But we need to go underneath to find out what kind of, beneath that one, what is happening. Then there are those whom I think that at the beginning, they can gain fame or they can get prominence and be visible, but actually they don't believe in it. That was a good example of somebody presenting the bill in Parliament. So there is also that group, the second one, I would think. But then there's a third one, which for lack of a better word, I would say genuine. They see the injustice, they see the inconvenience, they see the gaps, and they see the different presentations. So as a result, they tend to, they actually go out of their way to make change. Let me give you an example of for women Sudan, which was founded by a man who knew his daughters needed education could be provided, because what was available was for men. Excuse me. So as a father, being capable, he founded the university. And the university is still ongoing and moving forward. Excuse me. So I would think a genuine approach and a feminist male who is doing work and talking on behalf of women. So to emphasize, I would ask, what is the obstacle? And my own personal assessment is that each of us, whether male or female, we need to get it from this empowerment from inside each of us, what we would call from our hearts. Do we need change? And if we think we need change and we are convinced, then it will be possible to invade another one's territory without being labeled or without being pushed aside where there is discrimination. Because I have a feel from this that although there is a group of male champions, they are not really being accepted fully as working for change and for transformation. And I think if even the male, if the person who is a champion, a male champion, and is working for gender equality, doing it in a way of being convinced and not just a gallery player, I think eventually those people can be the wall or the obstacle can be removed and the door can be opened fully, because it's clear that there are people who are concerned and they want a just society, but we have to see how we can deal with it from that angle of accepting each other and believing that people can be genuinely working for change rather than labeling them. And this is possible as long as we get rid of the fear and the loss of power. Because as I conclude, I think from the men's perspective, it's the issue of losing power that causes all these gaps. Because if you think of the domestic relations, not just the bill, but the whole process from the 1940s, when the Ugandan situation, the women brought this to the fore, up to now, the issue has never been solved. It is about property, it is about power, it is about who decides who. And unless we are willing to let go of some things, even when they are male champions, they will remain very few and they will not help to cause the change that we require. So I'd like to end here and thank you very much once again and say that I really applaud Amon and his group for starting this debate and for moving it forward, because I think if we can bring out these problems and bring them into the practical side, for instance, in action research, to be able to change society so that we can move into a just society that we all crave for in Uganda. I thank you once again.
Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation, for bringing in the perspective of activism and how it has been happening in the 1980s. I would like to recognize the presence of Honorable Victoria Sekitoleko, Dr. Maggie Chigozi. These are prominent activists that are in the audience, and we are hoping that you'll join in the conversation and give us your views on some of these debates going on. Dr. Peace Musimenta, Dr. William Tayebwa, and Dr. Zobia Mbaine and Eric Tumwesige from Gender Mainstreaming. You're listening to the former head of gender mainstreaming. She has just finished the presentation. How is it going on right now in that unit? How are we mainstreaming gender and involving men in Makerere University? Dr. Kabonesa Consolata and our former students and the current students online, we recognize you. Without wasting much time, I'm going to go to the panelists. The panelists, you have 15 minutes within which to give your presentation. And we'll start with Dr. Madanda Ramazan, a former member of the School of Women and Gender Studies. We are delighted to have you back here. Currently, Dr. Madanda is the Senior Gender Advisor at CARE International, Uganda. He worked previously with Libya. So he combines both practice and academia again. Dr. Madanda, it's always good to have you back. Dr. Madanda.
Good morning and greetings. The network is playing some tricks here. Otherwise, thank you very much, Florence, for the introduction. And I got bits of it, but I hope it all went well. And greetings to all of you colleagues. I can see many people I knew before on the call, at least by the name. And I also join, my senior mentor as well, Joy Kwesiga, to congratulate Amon for pushing into this direction, and also for the colleagues who have supported him, like Josephine and all of you. I must say that I had a privilege to be cited in this presentation that we are talking about my experience of trying to research on the experiences of men while I was still teaching at the School of Women and Gender Studies. And I wrote what I thought was a very wonderful proposal and submitted for some competitive funding. So it went through stage 1, 2, 3, and then lost at the end. And when I tried to get some feedback, I was told, this one is probably a diversion of resources. So the idea, probably what I'm trying to say here is that for some time, probably there was no, people did not see the need to focus on this area of research, as the thinking was that there are more urgent issues that needed to be focused on. I will make my contributions to see from, first of all, a bit of theoretical, but also practical angle, having been both in academia and now in practice for almost an equal number of years, actually. I was in Makerere for 12 years, and I've been in practice now for 10 years, so 2 years to balance up. So, so that's where I'm going to come from, and again to build on what drove me to write that proposal was to find out what I was thinking as women experiences of men working in what I by then thought of as women-dominated spaces. One of them, of course, was the Department of Women and Gender Studies. I think at that time, probably substantially appointed men were too. out of the other number of women, and also looking at men who were working in women's organizations, women's NGOs, professions like nursing, and wanted to really understand what their contributions were and how they were dealing with the crisis of masculinity. When you read the paper, the publication that we are now discussing, Amon points out the questions he was confronted with while studying women's studies, which actually I also answered on a daily basis when I was doing my MA in women's studies. I think that's how they used to call it, with Florence and other colleagues who are on this call and others. So I was trying to build on feminist thought, whose considered objective, I thought, was to abolish gender roles and also eradicate male privilege in all its forms. So how could men, in a way, cooperate or commit a sort of suicide by dismantling a system that accorded them privilege? So that was the kind of thinking. And this proposal was never funded, and I've not resubmitted it anyway. I probably it's something that maybe we can look at. Now, today I see this as a good opportunity to discuss a research which is looking at a similar theme, at least broadly, and also specifically on the issue of male engagement. Now, I must say that in the area of practice that I'm doing and that I've done, male engagement is actually seen as a small component in the whole programming, current thinking around the programming on gender equality and women empowerment, and I'll come back to that. But let me focus on the publication a bit, which I found not only stimulating, but also provocative. And very importantly, it is written in a very accessible way, although, very grounded on solid feminist thought. And this is critical, that grounding it on solid feminist thought can that also provide a good foundation to discuss issues of masculinity, and in this case, patriarchy and male engagement. Now, so that strength in the paper is also found to be seen as an area that requires improvement. For instance, I did not see the publication drawing much experiences from individuals and organizations that have deeply worked with male engage, or what we call the role model many approaches. And I think probably this is where Dr. Amon can look at, because the perspectives in the document are mainly drawn from organizations that are largely feminist, that are largely women's organizations, one at ACFOD. We have the male engaged networks, etc., and organizations like CARE and others, which are deeply engaged with the male engaged approaches, and this would enrich insights, but that could be for a future paper. However, the paper, despite that, captures interesting scenarios of how men came to be or were thought to have come into the engagement with women's spaces. Now, I think the author also looks at mainly Uganda. I think in terms of dating, the origin of this discussion, I think is mainly from the 1960s, because slightly it goes to 1920s. So this again is good, but it misses the opportunity whereby men did not engage with gender equality or empowerment of women just recently, and at least prominently discussed. Perhaps what we are dealing with in the paper is another heightened phase where the approach has been seen as new, but also now has been given a name. I'll just give one or two examples so that, again, probably this is for future work. For example, we know some feminist theorists who are identifying as men. Many of us know, people like John Stuart Mill, Cornell, among others, but we also know quite a number of men who have engaged in this area of women empowerment, gender equality, although not with that name. for quite a long period of time. Probably some people would even say biblical Quranic times. So, so there are traces of male engagement in women's lives for very many years. So this needs to be acknowledged, I think, again, to ground the foundation a little bit more. And in recent times, we know and we've seen players in the girls or women's education, for example, such as establishment of various women or girl schools, even if you take the example of Uganda. But I want to give one prominent example from Sudan, not South Sudan, but Sudan, what is now the north. We have a university there in Omdurman called Afad University. And when you look at the roots of this university, established for girls, it has roots in the 1880s and was set up, initially, not as a university, but at least as a form of education center in the early 1990s. So across the education journey in many countries, including Uganda, girls' schools have been established by men. And so there has been a contribution of men's engagement, for some time, and also in these areas as men. As a contribution from men. So the point I'm trying to make is that male engagement is not only in the three areas which are very prominent, and I think some of these are discussed. The public discussed more than three, which is very good. But the main engagement has been around gender-based violence, prevention, eradication, minimizing HIV and AIDS, and also promoting family planning. And initially, of course, we see this, the conceptualization of these approaches have been largely conceptualized as a problem to be fixed, but that men are a problem to be fixed if these programs have to succeed. In other words, men come in these programs, quote unquote, to help women. And of course, that is, as we know, is quite narrow. Now, more recently, we've seen broader efforts of addressing unequal gender relations, which goes further to include areas of politics, although we know this has been there, but not much seen, except of course what I heard about those parliamentary lobbying, etc., but not really touted as a male engaged approach, politics, decision making, and more importantly, now we are seeing great engagement in what you'd call women economic empowerment, where, as we know globally, men control a lot of resources within the economic sector, I think over 80%, whereas women play a big role, they are not so much in control. So they are, so what I'm trying to say here is that the conceptualization of the male engaged approach and contribution needs to go beyond that traditional three areas to these broader ones, and probably highlight that a little bit more. And especially in women economic empowerment, it is seeing a big focus right now. This is very important to look at how this engagement could or could not contribute. There are also emerging approaches. I hope I'm still with you. There are also emerging approaches to gender equality. Hello, can I hear one voice at least?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. And I'm about to reach the end. So there are also emerging approaches to gender equality now, which argue that for sustainable change to occur, and these approaches are within the practice, it must involve changes at an individual level, because male engagement has mainly been at actually surrounding the individual, particularly in the household and in the immediate community. But right now, the thinking is to have holistic, sustainable change. You need interventions at individual level, which focus on individual women and girls, for example, at the household to engage men and boys to create an enabling environment, and then beyond to the subnational, to the national, and even international level. And at CARE, we have been experimenting and also implementing a model called the power model, which tries to address this kind of approach. And I'm also happy to note that the Ministry of Gender, actually, Labor and Social Development, the Uganda one, through a program they are calling Spotlight Program, is also trying to look at this combination. So in other words, whereas we are talking about male engagement, which is very important, the current practice, which seems to be a little promising, is that you need to go beyond that and also combine approaches from the individual to the global level. So finally, or almost finally, the debate on whether or not to involve men in the empowerment of women and girls and broadly gender equality, in fact, is probably just beginning to start. It has not ended and will not close soon. And I think Professor Joy Kwesik also alluded to this. And the practice is also varied. As we know, gender is diverse, its context is specific, but has all these various dimensions that are coming up, it's non-binary, and this kind of understanding is continuing to grow. So we know, for instance, of men head teachers, for example, in girls-only schools, as you know, in Uganda even, but we also know that this is not obvious. We know of men working on gender at professional levels, but we also know the discomforts of this kind of approach. We know of men who are working as midwives, and I'm quoting this, but also know of women and men who think that to work as a midwife, you must be a woman. And I'm talking about what is happening now, not what happened before. So this is not yet resolved, and we will not, as feminisms, as we know, masculinities and viewpoints are very varied and they are very complex. And I want to end there and thank the Dr. Amon for providing this very stimulating publication. And thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Dr. Madanda. You've saved us 1 minute. I acknowledge that. And the conversation online is very interesting. The question being asked is, should men be the main actors in this game? That's from Gertrude Kenyagi. It is a reproduction of patriarchy. If you ask me, we say main actors. And the response from Dr. Mwiine Ozobia is that they should be equal actors, not main actors. So the question of equality, to what extent do we involve the men? Let's invite Mr. Sekajolo Hassan to the conversation. Mr. Sekajolo Hassan is the country director, Men Engage Platform, and former African Regional Coordinator, Men Engage Network.
Thank you.
15 minutes.
Thank you, Florence. Dr. Amon, I don't know where to start, but the report brings out strong points that we are facing on a daily basis as we do work for engaging men and boys, not only in Africa, but also at the global level as Men Engage Alliance. Now, I want to restrict my discussion to the how, because that's where the actual point is, on the how. As the Men Engage Alliance, we have developed accountability toolkit, accountability standards, and this accountability is trying to answer the how. Because if we don't answer the how, the feminist movement has concerns about male engagement strategies. And the concerns are valid. The concerns are trying to make sure that we don't reproduce the same things we want to eliminate. So that then drove us to work with the feminist movement, the likes of Athena, COFEM, to try and see how do we then, as we go about the how of working with men and boys, what are the standards? What are the accountability standards? And for us, what does accountability mean when we are doing work with men and boys? It simply means the commitment that individuals and organizations doing this work of engaging men and boys, the commitment that they have, and appropriate conduct in a sense that we don't reproduce the same inequalities we're trying to remove. We don't reproduce male hegemony that we are trying to address. So this appropriate conduct and this commitment form what we call as accountability. But accountability to who? Accountability to who It's accountability to the feminist movement and other groups. It's very important because this work that we are doing was not started by the organizations and individuals doing male engagement work. No, it wasn't started by them. It was started by women's rights movements. So we have to be accountable as we do this work. And when we actually remain accountable, then that is when we fit the definition of allies. When we are accountable, we care that we don't take too much space when we come into the work for gender equality, so that the movement is still centered, okay? And all of us are equal players in this movement to make sure that no one is taking too much space from the other. Then, so the question is then, how do you do this accountability? How do you do it? We do this accountability by listening to the groups, the feminist movement, the other groups of different genders. Can we listen? Those of us who are doing work with engaging men and boys, are we listening to the women's rights movement? Do we even know what the agenda is in the women's rights movement? Okay, because if we are allies, if we are equal players, do we know what the agenda is? And how do we fit into the feminist agenda? We have to do a lot of consulting. We have to consult to make sure that we are actually not eroding the gains that the feminist movement has attained towards gender equality. So we constantly have to consult each other to see that what we are doing is actually in tandem and not challenging what the feminist movement is doing, okay? But also, as we do work with engaging men and boys, we have to acknowledge that we are learning on the job. We are learning on the job and we're not here to challenge. So the narratives that Dr. Amon was talking about, oh, there's a lot of concentration on girls, now we need to concentrate on boys, is also problematic for us who are engaging men and boys. It's really problematic. So we need to find a better way to put it. Because if we put it like that, it comes off as if we are now out to challenge the gains that have been done on women and girls, and that becomes problematic. So as we do the work of engaging men and boys and trying to be accountable to make sure that we don't reproduce the same things we're aiming to achieve, both of us, we also need to be aware of power and privilege, and we know it's fluid, okay? It keeps changing. And then we have to be open to criticism. We have to be open to criticism. That is how we remain accountable. That is how we learn on the job. We have to acknowledge our mistakes, learn from them, and continue working. So the issue of the how is quite important. So we need to see, how do we build this movement of power with? How do we build that? How do we get to power with? How do we build that movement that aims for power with? And it's a big question, and we have to keep pondering and learning, and scholarly works like what Dr. Amon is presenting today are quite important for us to critically reflect and say, what are we doing and how are we doing it? Are we being truly accountable? Are we being truly allies in this work for gender equality? But also to acknowledge that gender inequalities also affect men and boys. They do. We have to acknowledge that. And once we acknowledge that, then we're in better position to start to engage and say, how do we work together in a way that doesn't, hurt each other? But also, if harm is done, how do we mitigate harm? How do we address harm? How do we put accountability in real practice? These are questions that we continuously need to learn from them. So if you have a network like Men Engage Network is of 60 organizations, how do you ensure that all those organizations fully understand what accountable practice, are putting accountability in practice? How do you do it? It's a long journey that we constantly need to be consulting each other, listening to each other, and making sure that we are learning and moving together in the spirit of power with, and building strong movements to achieve gender equality. in Uganda. I will not say much because most of the issues have been said by the other discussants, but that's the point I really wanted to bring in, so that working with men and boys is not seen as helping women, okay? It must be seen as a values-based system. It's about values. The men need to have the values of and change their attitudes about what women are. For me, it's about values. It's not about work. So I don't look at this as scholarly work or a job. No. Can we get those values within ourselves? Because then the issue of the one you said, Florence, that same man was the key resistant to the marriage and divorce bill. It's about values. If men get the values within themselves and begin to appreciate and know women are equals, we need to have relationships based on mutual respect and equality with people. That's the starting point. And then there we begin to move together, working together mutually for gender equality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sekajolo, for those insights. So the question comes to how, after we've done the theorization, after we are doing the actual work, my internet keeps on going on and off, but there were very important discussions going on between the people, the activists. Anna from Annabelle Okot from Diaconia was asking a question of to what extent we engage with this, with the male involvement without eroding the successes that have come as a result of focusing on the key issues that affect our women. But I want you to keep those questions. Since the internet is going on and off, we may have to ask you to raise your hand when it comes to question and answer time, because I've lost track of the ones that keep on coming because of the internet. But let's have the last panelist, Dr. Hannah Muzee. She's currently a postdoctoral research fellow in gender politics at Stellenbosch University, South Africa. Her research focuses on aspects that deepen women's political participation and representation in parliament. And she's the author of the 2019 Sister Robert, Sister John, Enhancing and Gendered Membership of the Uganda Women Parliamentary Association, which was published in Agenda magazine. Anna, you're welcome. You have 15 minutes to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bila. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'll just put off my video just to save on the bandwidth. So thank you very much, Dr. Mwiine, for inviting me to participate in this workshop. And it's also nice to meet Dr. Bila once more. I think we met briefly sometime back in 2017. And I don't know whether you quite remember that. And over the time, whilst doing my PhD too, I've been interacting with Dr. Mwiine, and part of my interactions also were based on the paper that I authored, that is Sister Robert, Sister John, Enhancing Women's Voices and the Gendered Membership of Uganda's Women Parliamentary Association. And so, and that's part of the reason of what actually brings us together and in connection. So I'll basically try to tell the story of what the paper was about. So the paper actually tells the story of how Uganda Women's Parliamentary Association, which is popularly referred to as UWOPA, works with male legislators to promote pro-women legislation and enhance women's voices during deliberation in Parliament. And by voice in the paper, I referred to the ability of women to influence decisions, both actively and passively, and which also involves the lobbying for male support to achieve feminist agenda, which I argue is one step in the journey towards gender equality in descriptive and substantive representation. So in my interaction with the women of UOPA, they described how they managed to actively represent women's agenda in parliament and enhance women's voices amidst the different patriarchal, cultural, and administrative bottlenecks. And the participants testified to the influence of caucusing and how it improved on their effectiveness compared to if they actually acted individually. But despite the evident solidarity and sisterhood that was facilitated, or that is facilitated by UOPA, this was not devoid of consensus challenges on the floor of parliament among women legislators. And one participant mentioned a time during the domestic violence bill where one of the women legislators actually spoke against the bill and said something like, sometimes women too misbehave, are uncooperative, and their husbands have the right, to beat them up, so to say. And she noted how this statement actually infuriated the women at that point, which actually points to the fact that whereas there's solidarity and sisterhood that is being enhanced, the women do not. It does not necessarily mean that all women will speak from the same point of view. So they noted that, well, everybody is free to air their views, but due to the fact that they need consensus on certain issues that are, gender related, then they had to think out of the box. And part of what was thinking out of the box meant that the women legislators recognized that they needed to lobby extensively, which meant engage with and convince different groups of parliamentarians to support women-led legislation. Consequently, they took advantage of the fact that while women form the biggest portion of the electorate and deliberately engaged, they took the advantage of the fact that women form the biggest portion of the electorate and used that as an advantage to engage with male legislators as associates. Now, one thing for certain is that the phenomenon of numbers is still real for women, even in the Ugandan parliament, as we see now. And the issue of numbers when it comes to deliberative situations is very key. And that in one way, speaks to the need to involve a number of actors into the broad feminist movement or the women's movement. So in essence, the study actually underscored the need for involving both men and women in deconstructing patriarchy and sexism. And when we talk about patriarchy, we realize that this is it's deeply ingrained in society, that it's not only perpetuated by only men or promoted by only men, but even women, whether knowingly or unknowingly, participate in its promotion. So to be able to effectively deconstruct patriarchy and sexism, both men and women need to be involved in the feminist movement and in the women's movement. So UOPA, for the case of my study and in the paper, represents a new trend, I argued, represents a new trend in feminist and women's movements concerning the deliberate efforts made by women parliamentarians to include men in the struggle for pro-women legislation. And this is where women's voice now comes in, because it is the women leading the way into deliberately involving men in the pro-women legislation. It's, however, it's quite, it attracts a lot of backlash, in the form of whether you're actually promoting male hegemony, in that sense, whether co-opting male legislators and to move bills on the floor of parliament is not a furthering of male dominance in one way. But actually, what we found out during our study and from the experiences of the women in UOPA is that deliberately involving women as men, represents, the women's voices in women-led legislation and represents their strength, their courage, their ingenuity, and the capability of women parliamentarians in convincing men to support pro-women legislation. Because to do that, then they have to be able to clearly show the injustices that are happening in society and to show how those injustices affect both men and women. And one of them actually noted, the participants noted that even when you look at just the men as they get into their lobbying experiences, you know, they speak to the fact that the men have sisters attached to them, they have mothers attached to them, they have wives attached to them. So there's still a connection with a woman in your life. So if this is happening to her, just imagine if this happened to her, what would you think about it? And that is one of the ways they're being able to convince men to be able to understand and also support pro-women legislation. And so that's how the paper actually ties into what Dr. Mwiine has been speaking about. Now, just before I conclude, to address maybe one of, to speak to one of the questions that Dr. Mwiine posed in terms of when men are speaking for women, you know, I was speaking on behalf of women. And in terms of also kind of promoting that male hegemony. And I think at some point also it's important to, as we move forward in the feminist movement and women's movement and also in academia, it's important for us to also situate feminism in history and in African history. And when you look at African liberation and Africans' liberation struggle, which has not even ended, and Africans' liberation struggle also ties into women's emancipation. And we cannot expect to have, it would be futile for us to expect a truly liberated Africa in the sense of Pan-Africans, a truly liberated Africa economically, socially, and productively if a particular half of the population in Africa continues to be oppressed and exploited by the other half, which is the men who have enjoyed certain privileges as you know, that have somehow been handed down through colonialism. And I think Dr. Mwiine spoke about that, you know, in his opening. So it's important, I think, as we move forward, that as we try to create this sense of, you know, breaking the binary between men and women's, you know, the binary in the men and women's movement, and trying to protect the space of feminism, to also situate like women's emancipation and liberation in a broader sense, that we all, and I think the previous speaker spoke about it, that we all actually benefit from gender equality. And gender inequality has brought us this far. And if we do not involve both men and women in the struggle towards a totally emancipated and liberated society, then we run the vicious cycle and will remain in the same situation that we actually find ourselves in. I think I'd like to stop there for now.
Thank you very much for your generosity. The panelists have given us some time. I know we had started late and I was worried that we may not have enough time for discussions. But we have saved some time enough to engage with the issues that have been raised by Dr. Amon in his presentation, the presentation of the discussant, Professor Joy Kwesiga, and the panelists. I would like to bring this now to us. We've been listening for some time and we've been engaging. Online discussions have been going on, but we could be having key questions that we want to address either to Dr. Amon or observations directly to the panelists. You're welcome now to make your observations and questions. I'll start with the people in the room, and I encourage those online to raise their hands in case they want to ask questions. So the floor is open. Yes, Professor Chikoma first, and then we'll come to Dr. Jibola and to Dr. Ann Nsima.
Thank you very much, the moderator, Florence, and good morning once again, colleagues who are here physically present, as well as those online. Really, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Mwiine for, engaging us in this very important conversation. For us who have been following what he does, he actually lives whatever he has said, and that is actually very welcome and very refreshing. I really want to just share a few things. I know that Dr. Mwiine has been very instrumental in what I do as part of my engagement as well. And for those who may not know, I'm one of the core principal investigators on the very important project here in Makerere University, the project of kicking sexual harassment out of this university. And I'm very much involved in, as part of that project, in this question of engaging men, especially, as you will be aware, after Makerere coming to the spotlight regarding this question of sexual harassment. Of course, it is not to say that among all the universities, it was only Makerere that was having this problem. But, as the Uganda say, so I think that's sort of what happened to Makerere. But as part of this holistic approach to try and address the question of sexual harassment, I really thought that it wouldn't be complete if we just got a project that will address issues of how do we avoid sexual harassment from the point of the females. And so we added the component of male engagement, the male's hub. And Dr. Mwiine has been one of the facilitators in the engagements we've had for both the staff and the students. And one of the things that we have realized along the way is that, initially, many things are taken for granted by, men, including the position of power. I think many, take it naturally that that is what it is, because biologically you have some physical difference between women and men. Then that is extrapolated to suggest that, all other things are supposed to be structured that way. And we've found that in the conversations during our engagement with men and also the students. And we find many of them come to this conversation mainly because of the policy and the issue of sexual harassment, with some of them just fearing that they are not aware. So they come for awareness. And we've realized that that has not worked very well, because once they have realized that they can avoid to be caught, that is all that there is. And the other thing we have realized also is that a conversation among and between men is useful at the beginning, just to get, to break this ice for them in a sort of safe environment where men can talk about their issues. But we found that it is not sufficient to deal with the questions of gender equality in a very holistic way, because I think there is the idea that all that we need to do is to show that we are aware and we know that this is wrong and we don't condone it, and we stop there. Yet from all the contributions we've had here, I think it's important for men to actually be accountable and talk about these things, and actually move to change. So we now have realized that we need to engage men differently beyond just talking in a safe space between men. We think that now we need to have a conversation that all genders are in that conversation, so that it doesn't look like we are trying to, in the words that people have used here, we are kind of regrouping to create new forms of patriarchy, but rather to show real commitment and get people to be much more accountable and deal with these issues decisively. My question to Mwiine is something that I wanted to understand, sometimes which needs to be used to inspire those who we bring on the male space. When did you realize that you really needed to be a gender activist? Was this just because of scholarly just interest, or did this have something personal to you? Like, I will give you my own experience quickly so that you see why, for me, it sort of now looks like it is natural that wherever there is any conversation around these gender things, I'm part of it. I actually found that there was a lot of something personal in this question of men and women and wielding power when you actually don't even have what it takes to have that power. I was educated mainly by my mother, and I was one of the last borns. So obviously, the time I came, my mzee was towards the end of his life. So he was not working, and economically was not okay. But my mother was the one now who decided to take care of my education. And she engaged in different forms of, economic activities just to try and find face for me. And in doing that, she had to leave home for some time and go in places where, people used to say that, you see, when your wife goes and trades in those places, you have lost. You've lost that wife. And my father used to meet this kind of talk within his groups. And I used to see a bit of tensions, but at the time I was young and so on. And she was able then to actually find money to educate me in a very expensive school at the time, which everyone was actually very surprised. And it is then that I started realizing that there's something about this woman. One, to insist that I continue an education that is expensive, she's struggling. And then I'm also seeing my father having his own challenges to accept that he's not the one educating me, and that his wife has to go away for some time and so on. So why I think this is important is that when eventually I decided to take a PhD, I decided to investigate this question of female entrepreneurship and this question of success and what it means, and a number of other things. And that's how I ended up, having been in psychology. I had initially thought that the differences between women and men is what we need to interrogate to be able to appreciate why some people succeed as entrepreneurs and others not. But eventually I realized, once I was exposed to feminist theories and critical discourses, that there was more to do with power relations. And since then, I've become very much aware, and I have become part of one of those feminist scholars that doesn't reside in the School of Women and Gender Studies. And I think we need to continue to cultivate more of such scholars. I thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you very much, Professor Chikoma. I gave him time because he didn't have time to speak as the deputy principal. And I'm going to request that when you give your comments, you limit it to one question and be brief within 1 minute so that we have as many questions and a robust discussion. So Dr. Jibola.
Yeah,
briefly.
Prof's accounts just lends credence to the fact that men should not be shut out in this movement. And I think that also aligns with my experience. There are men who have personal experiences that will motivate them to want to be involved in the equality for men and women. And my view is that on no account should we think of shutting them out. But I want to quickly make a remark concerning the presentation the gentleman made, and that is on the ground of accountability. So the question is, how do we extend this to other movements that are interested in equality between men and women? Then I also want to direct a question to Doctor. You talk about silence around vulnerability. The protest by women against hazards in jobs that were historically engaged by men. Now, when the authorities came in for whatever intervention, are you trying to say that only women were targeted for such interventions? Then talking about the critical junctions you reveal in your work, I'm wondering whether the balancing of the scale discourse has to do with affirmative action. And I'm also looking at the conversations around that, whether that promotes mediocrity rather than merits. So these are issues I would like you to address.
Thank you, Dr. Jibola.
Yeah.
Dr. Ansima.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Amon. I really congratulate you upon what I would call bringing sanity to the School of Women and Gender Studies. I think this is a great discussion. But what I wanted to comment on is what actually Madanda said. He said the danger that we are having is the way we are conceptualizing male involvement. I think we should not look at male involvement as if men were coming to speak for or act for. I think the focus should be on helping men to come on board and helping them to understand how they benefit from gender equality. What is in there for them? I normally say when I'm talking to people that you say, when you tell men that about gender equality, about their partners, it becomes very problematic. But if you talk to them about social justice regarding their daughters and their sisters, they are likely to understand more than when you just focus on, you see, women. So I think that we need to look at the conceptualization and the intentions of having males on board. Because if we just focus on this aspect of men coming to speak for, how about if they say women are using us? Women are using us for their ends. You get what I mean? So I think we need to go beyond bringing men on board to think that they are coming to speak for, but they are coming on board because they are coming to appreciate the importance of gender equality. Now, there are many concerns about having men on board and probably taking over the show and probably taking over. I also really think that, as Hassan said, that, for example, what the organization he works for was not started by men, it was started by women. I want to think that women are not doing this out of false consciousness. I think they know what they are doing. It is as Amon said, it's a strategy. And a strategy, as he was worried that supposing this strategy takes longer than expected, I would probably not focus. I would look at the process critically, but I wouldn't focus more on the process. I would also focus more on the outcome. If we have a male involvement and we pass the Domestic Violence Act, and we pass the sexual offences bill. I mean, this is a long-term and very critical and important. So I would also look at the importance of getting them on board and how and what is the achievement. And of course, for me, I am very careful with the words of saying, you see, the women's legislation. It's not a women's legislation. It could be a gender-friendly legislation, but it's not a women's legislation. So when you bring them on board to do for women, it becomes problematic. But you bring them on board to know that this is a gender relations issue and they have something to benefit from, I think it becomes easier. I want to conclude by saying that when you have a strategy, just like I would say the feminist movement have a strategy. In this case, it's not, you are trying to maneuver through a certain structure, which is solid patriarchal norms, solid patriarchal culture. Sometimes you have to use what we call the humble spirit that Naila Kabil brings on board. And if you read Mahmoud with her research in Egypt of how women use a strategy, because you are in a society where marriage, for example, is a virtue. If you're not married, you cannot be a leader. If you're not married, you cannot be respected in society. So how do you make sure that you use this humble spirit to go through what you're going through as a strategy to get where you want to get? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. One last question, and then I'll go to the online audience. I see 3 hands up. So one last question from, please introduce yourself. Yes, come closer and use one of the microphones.
I want to see very quickly. I want to see how can you under.
You can put, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so thank you very much. I wanted to just continue exactly where you ended, and I wanted to emphasize the issue of...
Introduce yourself first.
Oh, I'm called Dafin Agava. I'm a lecturer at in School of Women and Gender Studies. Yes, so I wanted to talk about the issue of the privilege, male privilege, which I think Dr. Amon touched on, but maybe I didn't see it coming out very clearly, in the sense that when we are talking about bringing males and men on board, do we talk about the addressing the male privilege to start with? The reason why I'm bringing up that is when you compare the gender equality campaign to, let's say, the racism campaign, there was always a question of how, when you're sort of almost fighting against a movement, how do you bring in the same people you claim to be fighting? How do Black people bring on board the white people when they've not looked at why the gender equality campaign exists, why the racism campaign exists? Which brings me to the point of, does any man join? Do you, because even as a woman, it doesn't mean every woman will know about gender equality. Not every woman will stand for gender interests. There is a lot of unlearning as a person who is a product of your society. So which males do you bring on? And are they males who are willing to start from the point of critiquing and looking at themselves as, how do I benefit as a male to the patriarchal movement before you start engaging these men in the movement? And that's where the fight, there's always the conflict of males taking over and perpetuating patriarchy, because you have to understand as a man why this movement exists in the first place. So that was my point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dafin. And now, Dr. Mwiine, I have to consult you. Can you take 4 other questions from online, or do you first want to respond to this and then we go online and we conclude?
I think we could answer these first.
Okay.
And then we could go into another round of online audience.
So you're welcome to answer.
And I can see some questions for Hassan. He has noted them. My mentor had gone out. I wanted to flag off some of them, but yeah, she will take the online questions. Yes, motivation. Well, I'll cut short that one, but I want to say that in the history of my schooling, there are many episodes that really contribute to the motivation, but I want to particularly pick up on, studying gender and development as a course at the university. Coming there after the course had spent 3 years, there was a feeling among us students that this is a new course that has a lot of prospects in terms of job market. And so we went into choosing gender studies as a unit under social sciences. But during our first term, we met a rough reception on campus. As young men doing gender and development, you found yourself justifying yourself in almost every corner of the streets at the university, asking, why are you doing this? Are you a woman? And then you're like, okay, this was a course that was available for selection. And so I raised my antennas to look at exactly what was the content, what was the conversation in this scholarship. And then I think what raised my concern seriously was when I had returned after the first semester, I had gone back home for holiday. And there was this old man in our village who asked me, oh, you have not been around. Where did you go? So I told him, I went to the university. I am at Makerere University. And then he asked me, what are you studying? I told him. And then he asked me, of all things, you live here, you go to Kampala, you have an opportunity to study at the university, and you are wasting taxpayers' money studying women? So he told me, if you wanted to know about women, you should have come here. I should have told you who women are. And that was really, a hard push. And when I returned, I really wanted to know, what is this scholarship? What does it hold? And that is where I encountered conversation on masculinities, conversation on femininities, and how socially constituted they are. So that is largely where the motivation came from. And then I fell into this host of mentors who have, inspired me to do this, from research, looking at male champions, and then going into South Africa, where there is a wider scholarship on critical masculinities. That's what the journey has been. In terms of, silences around vulnerability, I would particularly pick an academic argument raised by one of the South African feminist scholars, Lindsay Cross, who is at University of Western Cape, who looks at ways in which gender discourse has quite oftenly, limited the knowledge on men, particularly men's vulnerability. That when you're talking about vulnerability, it becomes so difficult to envision men in that vulnerable position, especially when you have a gender discourse that is guided by the other prism that we looked at, balancing the scale of women as vulnerable and weak. Quite a discourse that also, traces its origin from, colonialism. And so it is the kind of discourse that we need to disengage. While we acknowledge that there are certain forms of vulnerability amongst women that need to be brought into the public discourse for attention, and rightly so because of the long history of patriarchy and oppression that they have gone through, I think we also need to cross that polarized boundary to look at the opportunity of knowing the other, particularly if we are interested in transformation. And that is where then Anne's question of, attention to how we conceptualize male involvement. So I am going to take that as a supportive comment to which we were arguing that we need to be conscious that in this process, we need to keep an eye, because we already have a long history of privilege and power. So you do not want to quickly center the men as critical actors, as I had, are they can't they be main actors? The moment you go that language, you slide back into the other discourse, because where you have a main actor, then you have the, less on the other side. We're saying that we can create a space of convergence. And for me, that process of legislation, which Anne says you can pay attention to, it's what I did when I was studying the parliament and the passage of domestic violence law. And I indicated that indeed, women's efforts to be able to identify, build collaboration, work with these men MPs and the kind of status they carry themselves with, it's some form of power, collective power to mobilize, to wield influence in that way, which we cannot necessarily wish away under the critique of male champions. But at the same time, we are saying, if this strategy of letting somebody to speak on behalf of another goes on, does it in any way challenge, in the first place, the cause of why we don't want to listen to women's voice in parliament? It might address the symptom, but it may not question and challenge the deep-rooted nature of patriarchal culture. So yes, I appreciate the need to look into the process and what power women come with into mobilizing male support and allyship, but at the same time, we need to be conscious because power relations change. Even when you score on a certain bill, there are certain forms of resistances that come through. So what I'm saying is, I'm not saying we should reject and do away with the strategy of male engagement. I'm saying that while we deploy it, we need to be critical. And in terms of academia, critical masculinity studies provides insights into how we can remain alert to possible, reincarnation of these male-dominated hegemonies. So, and Agaba was asking, what do we do with male privilege? And this is where the engagement or the conversation on this question is where I asked, when we are strategizing around men involvement, which men are we dealing with? What strategy are we working with? What do we want with them? Because it's definite, it has been elaborated, talked about, there are different forms of masculinities. So when you design a certain strategy, which men are you targeting and for what? What sort of change do you want to see? Is it the change within the men themselves? Is it the change in, what is it? And that question of privilege is embedded into my call that as we craft these strategies, we need to be cautious. We need to interrogate the assumptions that we bring on. If we have brought on male MPs, particularly most of them are drawn on because of the power they hold. They already hold positions of privilege. So we need to know that that is a category that enjoys a certain level of power. So how do we engage them without reproducing that power in gender equality activism?
Thank you very much. Hassan, do you want to respond to your question? Then we'll go online.
Yes, thank you, Amon. It is a disturbing discourse of male involvement versus male engagement. Involvement sometimes tends to leave the, tends not to uproot the hegemony that we talk about because it's just involvement. And there's a problem with male involvement because male engagement aims first and foremost at the individual, then goes to the workplace, to the community, to the national and global, okay? But first you start by having conversations with a man, okay? And trying to find out what is their position in society, what's their power, what's their privilege, and what do they think about their position in society. so that you start by transforming them to understand where they are and what it means to be where they are and what is it that they can do about who they are and where we want to be. So power and privilege is something that, like Amon says, you constantly need to be aware of. Now, about accountability, the question you asked, the toolkits are available. And I'm one of the trainers on that accountability toolkit. And this is something that can be got from the website for the Men Engage Alliance and can be adapted by many, many countries. Rwanda, for example, translated it in their own mother tongue so that people can get to understand what is this all about and how can we use it. So that is available everywhere. So I think those were mainly the questions that were addressed to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'll go to the online audience and I see 4 hands up. We'll start with Honorable Victoria Sekitoleko.
Thank you very much, moderator. Good afternoon, everybody. I understand we have 1 minute each, so I'll go straight to my question. The real reason I've sat through this from 9 until now, even if I had another meeting where I went for at least 1 hour, is what happened to me one time when I was in a TV studio waiting for a program to start. And this is about 4 years ago. And the men who were there, I was there with Miriam Matembe, the men who were there started on us, you know, where is the boy child? So in a calm manner, Miriam said, we have never been men. Let the men talk to the men and the women talk to the women, because we are only sharing. And this, most of it is actually supposed to be private and in homes. These men who I wish I could name, but some of the top men who are always talking about this and the other, the 3 of them came out and said they don't do it because they don't know what to say. So I remember taking on one of them from the education sector, and I asked him, how did you learn what you know? And he said, from the street. That really frightened me out of my wits. So I've been wondering, should there be a school of men and gender studies? Because even the leadership don't know. I have been there, trust me. Their language still needs to, they still need a lot of learning. So if the leaders don't know, and these who are in the middle who are always talking, come out and confess that they don't know, what do we do? Finally, this issue of involve men, bring the men in. I was there in the 80s when this conversation was actually about girls. There was nothing to enter. When we started Action for Development, we started from nothing. So before I conclude, I'll say this. One of the commentators about, I don't know what you call them in your academic language, but after the main presenter presented, Mr. That one of the comments I had was that most of the institutions, organizations he spoke to were women's organizations. Are there men's organizations? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the thought-provoking question. And thank you for keeping up with us up to now. Maggie Chigozi, please ask your question.
Thank you very much. And this has been a very enlightening discussion. I'd like to thank the researcher for the work that is done. And I'm excited about the future. One thing we have done as Uganda is to sign on to the SDGs. SDG, where we are expecting to be equal, to have achieved equality by 2030. 2030 is just around the corner, actually, when you look at it. What have we done? What are we asking government to do as far as, for example, parliamentarians? How do they get 50%? Do we need some more affirmative action? So that is still a question. And in business, and maybe to my sister feminists, I think we often talk to ourselves. I don't know how many in this room are from, other sectors. We do tend to stay within our comfort zone with people who agree with us. I've tried very hard as an individual to bring in the private sector, to make the private sector understand equality and how to support their women. Luckily with the UNDP, we launched, I think you all know about this, the gender seal. companies sign on to this, and then they make sure that they have, people, women on boards, and it's a very nice program. And I want to tell you that the men, and these are the people that create wealth. These are the women, people that create jobs. And the business women very much were the most energetic in signing on to this, to ensure that within their companies, they were gender friendly. So I want to thank you very much for this research and all the work you do for women. As a feminist and chair of Akina Mama Africa, yes, I'm totally with you, but I sincerely feel we need to pull in more, we need to pull in the men, and it's a good thing that this is, is the discussion today. Into this discussion, they love their daughters. They all love their daughters. How do we get them to understand that the wife and the mother and all the others are girls just like their daughters? So thank you very much, our Makerere University and the Department of Gender. You do excellent work, and thank you for this research.
Thank you very much, Dr. Makbiji Chigozi. And we still have 2 more questions for you, Amon. Richard Wanzala.
Yeah, I'll be there. So my question is, how is the academic to raise a gender equitable society, right from one's childhood to adulthood, like primary school, school level? Sorry, discussing this more sorry.
Okay, I think you should, we suggest you type the question in the chat. The network is not very good, so we cannot hear you. Please type the question in the chat. And let's listen to the last person, a former student, Emmanuel Kodo Mensa. Emmanuel, please ask your question.
Yes, can you hear me? Good afternoon.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, so my name is Emmanuel, and I'm a former student of gender and also a co-founder of an organization that is also working with men, basically to deconstruct these things that uphold issues of gender inequalities. I want to appreciate Dr. Amon for his work. The key thing I pick from his work is that, one, there is still more that we need to learn if we really want to, depending on how we conceptualize it, whether we want to engage or involve men. But the most important thing is, at the end of the day, we want change and we want to achieve gender equality. The second point, which is of interest, is what he emphasized. How do we do that? And there are a lot of things that we will need to learn and get it right. But one of the things, as per my experience working with men for the past few years, is that a lot of the men do not have the information. It is arguable, and a lot of people will say, where did we, as those who are pushing this agenda, learn the thing from? And a typical example in one of the engagement that I did was about the Domestic Violence Act. A lot of the men do not even know what it is and the implications for them if they have to get into some of these issues. And so moving forward, there is the need for us to focus both on the system and the actors. So an actor will be the men that we are dealing with. Irrespective of the interventions that we have, we need to understand who the man is, what are the aspirations, what motivates them to do what they do. And then beyond that, we should also know that as per the experience we have, they also have the will and the power either to make the decision to change or not. So with that in mind, how do we then run our intervention around that actor in such a way that we are able to deconstruct the system that upholds him to exhibit the so-called negative or toxic masculinity, but able to change him to be able to change others. So I think the critical point to take from Dr. Amon's presentation is the point of trying to understand the how and how best we can use that to push for the agenda that we all seek for. So thank you again, and thanks for the opportunity. Over.
Thank you very much. Emmanuel is our former student on the master's program and is also involved with the men's organization, Wang O, where they engage men on positive masculinities. He didn't introduce himself completely. The question from Richard is the role of academia in raising gender equitable men and women. Is asking, for example, at primary school and secondary school level, how is the curriculum designed to nurture future gender equitable men and women? So those are our questions for this round. Over to you, Amon.
Thank you, our participants on the virtual audience, for raising these insights and for being part of the conversation. I want to pick up on a few of them because the others were sort of comments on the way forward. But I like the idea that you can have Honorable Victoria Sechtoreko, who was key in, as she says, 1980s. So it, sitting into this conversation and staying in and raising concerns on men's knowledge around gender equality. And I must say that the limited knowledge or the no knowledge, at times the general prism which we talked about, the kind of binary which we raised, at times tends to constrain. There's an assumption that one group of people already know. For instance, if I can use the institution of culture and the institution of marriage, there are lots of assumptions that are held around men and what they know, and therefore no need to train them or to have a conversation with them on anything, particularly in marriage relations. I think there are assumptions which at times societies have held about men, which limit what men can know and can engage with. I want to pick from the work that I have picked from before, the work of Bell Hooks. She's the one who noted that we have conceptualized patriarchy in ways that have given men positions of knowledge and power without digging out and looking at how is this power constituted. And she noted that in most cases, patriarchy has denied men to know themselves, to know their vulnerabilities, to know their emotions, because there is a lot of assumption that men are not this, they are the other. And the moment you are operating those polarities, it restricts how much you can know about the other. So I think this conversation needs to, open up that space for us in the academia, for us in the world of feminist activism, to ask ourselves, how much can we know about men's experiences and men's practices? I did indeed interact with men's organizations, and that is how I got in touch with Hassan from the Men Engage network. And I met another institution. But as I noted, the area engagements which were face-to-face and etc. were dominated by the area history of women's movement, going to ACFORD and etc. And when I had just finished that, then everything was locked for physical engagement. But I did reach out to these men's organizations or organizations that are working with men involvement. But as Dr. Madanda has already indicated in his discussion, there is room for us to widen the scope of engagement, particularly with organizations that identify as men's organizations, that identify as, as men engaged. For instance, I met Dr. Lydia Mungerera, who has historically worked with Men Engage. So there are a number of these organizations, but I must say that I hope I did not slide into the same discourse that I'm trying to challenge, getting stuck into feminist theorization that limits broadened understanding of those actors. But yes, this is a conversation that we need to take right into these organizations and looking at how they are engaging with men involvement. And that ties in with Dr. Maggie Chigozi's very creative initiatives to move beyond the binary, to look at how do we move from the usual comfort spaces to go to the public sector. How do we engage with businessmen and businesswomen and look at what they know and increase on their level of learning? What I found useful in this concept of border crossing is the aspect of learning. That even when we fear that when we focus on men, we will divert their attention, they are the men that for most times we have requested to change. But if we do not take these trainings, if we do not make them part of the conversations, we'll be expecting too much from them in terms of change. One key question that is raised in critical masculinity scholarship is what kind of resources do men have in terms of culture, in terms of language? What kind of resources do they have to be different men? You've grown up from day one, you've been told the man is supposed to be this and that. And that social curriculum, which is so strong, tends to be dominantly patriarchal. So if we have not brought them into gender transformative trainings and, why would we expect them to be different? What sort of positive behaviors, gender equitable behaviors, have we introduced to them? Otherwise, if we do not bring men into these conversations, it might be difficult for us to expect them to be different. They might be strongly influenced by the cultural and the social learnings, which create privilege, which maintain and nurture male privilege. In the academia, I think majority of the gender scholarship is at the moment limited within the institutions of higher learning and also facing resistance, as our discussant indicated. Very many questions being asked. How can you teach for 3 years? You're teaching, and they simplify and ridicule it as you're teaching women. And I think these are public discourses that we need to challenge, that we need to take on and probably create wider spaces for academic engagement beyond institutions of higher learning. But I must say that other forms of learning have been done by women's rights organizations through community-based trainings. Several of them have gone as far as that, but they have not, that has not trickled into the academic institutions from primary going forward. So with these few reflections, I really appreciate your thoughts on the need to engage on this question for clarity on what is it that we mean when we talk about male engagement, and particularly on the question of what is it that men stand to gain from gender equality from a personal point of view, so that if they are, convinced and convicted from that position, then they see everything that is in for them, that is in to be part and parcel of these gender equitable interventions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amon. I'm wondering whether your mentor, Professor Yekere, wants to make a comment, to say something on this research.
I planned not to, but since the moderator is looking at me very nicely, then I may be tempted, and very briefly. First, to re-echo the need to avoid buzzwords. This is something that has been mentioned all over around the fact that gender studies seems to be a victim of buzzwords. So one buzzword comes, it's hastily put together, and then it sort of dominates the whole thing as if nothing has ever happened. This is the thing about male involvement. There are so many other buzzwords that, for example, Cornwall talks about. I think the issue of what do men stand to gain from gender equality was answered by the lockdown, COVID-19, where we found in the research that we did with Amon on gender-based violence, that all of a sudden, when all places were closed, the home was the only place to be. And men found that they could not fit there. So we talk about the violence against women and girls and so on, but actually there was a lot that happened that revealed certain inherent inconsistencies and vulnerabilities, where men struggle to build homes. Some women also build houses, but they cannot stay in them. And so the public-private divide that we normally take for granted for those who are teaching feminist theory, it's a very big issue. We need to re-theorize these things in a new way. And I think this is how these conversations also enrich our teaching. I would like to stop here because I can talk.
I believe we can have this discussion until the end of the day and come up with another paper and start another project altogether, because this is something that's thought-provoking, that needs to be theorized as well as recite upon further. There's still going to be a lot of scholarship in this area. Allow me to thank all of you for all your engagement, for your active participation, both the online audience and the audience here present. This has been a wonderful morning, well spent. We've learned a lot. The conversation continues. We've had practitioners. We've had representation from government. I see Jen Pagi from Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development, international participants from Niger, Zimbabwe, South Africa, and scholars from Makerere who are online. We appreciate your being here, and we hope that Amon has taken note of some of the comments that were there in the chat. There were too many and very, very engaging, and we appreciate all that. We're bringing this to a close and inviting you for, what are we calling it? Lunch, online audience. E-lunch is available. Thank you very much for your participation. So I hand over to the organizers. Thank you.
We thank the moderator for managing everything, including time, including the scholarship trend, including the smile, despite the fact that we didn't have any refreshments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Principal. And
we took this as you guys were our visitors. So, thank you very much.
thank you. Can we have an E? Or people have left, 36 only. Okay, bye online audience. We'll meet in another engagement. How do we do it? Okay, there's a question, how do we continue having it? We can continue having it online at MAC, School of Women and Gender Studies. Okay, there's a response from Esther. So the conversation continues.